How Arlong saved One Piece.
This is Arlong, arguably the first legendary villain of One Piece, and the antagonist responsible for many of the most iconic series moments to this very day. But what I want to know is how well Arlong stacks up 25 years after his story concluded in 1999. That's right, Arlong is a villain.
1999 is crazy.
And a lot's changed since then. So was Arlong really one of the greatest One Piece villains? Or is it all just nostalgia from a much simpler time when many
He is not one of the greatest One Piece villains.
exist? We're going to find out because we are on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the terror of East Blue himself, Arlong. So with Arlong, it's important to note that
what was his tier list before, bro? Crocodile S tier. I don't know nothing about Doflamingo. But yeah, Crocodile deserve S tier. Anil, I ain't gonna lie, I feel like he deserved S tier too, bro.
On a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, this time featuring the terror of East Blue himself, Arlong. So with Arlong, it's important to note that we experience him as a bit of an incomplete story. We originally see what he is during the Arlong arc, and then 500 chapters later, we learn why it is he became the thing it is that he is. But even without that added backstory, Arlong is a unique villain for East Blue, and when he's first introduced,
me personally, he gotta be on like in C tier. He not that good to me.
The very sexually charged chapter number 69, Arlong makes his philosophy quite clear. Money is good. It's the only thing a man can really believe in, which is a belief that he imparted onto Nami, which is something that she still partially carries with her to this very day. It's sort of like how when Law directly quoted Doflamingo saying, "The weak don't get to choose how they die." It's always really interesting when villains inform our heroes. But when it comes to Arlong, he's less of a pirate and more of a businessman. He's cordial with anybody who can bring value to his business. Like
yeah, I ain't gonna lie, he a
Arlong
dickhead.
is bending over backwards to accommodate Captain Nezumi, and when Nami returns, he decides to throw her a feast in celebration. Right before meeting him, we are led to believe that Arlong is a terrifying, merciless fisherman, and it caught me quite off guard to see him so chill and seemingly kind in his introduction. And a very intriguing thing about Arlong is that in the very legal sense of the word, he never lies. He deceives and he manipulates, but every word that comes out of his mouth is carefully considered. And
yeah, he's a scammer. He's a certified scammer.
The reason for that is because lying is what filthy humans do, which is a lesson that was branded into his brain after being betrayed by Koala's village. After that happened, he simply said, "This is what humans do." And as an ever superior fisherman, Arlong will never stoop to their level. He prides himself on honesty and integrity, or more accurately, his interpretation of honesty and integrity. Because Arlong believes that he has a divine right to rule over humans and describes the dynamic as follows. "We fishermen are evolved humans who have developed the ability to breathe seawater. Our fish-like powers make us far superior to you. We fishermen are the lords of all creation. A human fighting the fishman is fighting the power of nature itself." And
yeah, he's saying all that, not knowing devil fruits. Like, does he not know devil fruits exist at this time? Like, come on now.
basically, as the Lord of all creation, he gets to make the rules. He decides what the definition of honesty and integrity are. Although I will say that Arlong's overall goal is a bit divisive for me. He states that he's gathering funds to build the quote, Arlong Empire, which will rule the East Blue. I guess in his defense, at least he's not saying something like it will rule the whole world, because Arlong is a man who has actually experienced the true power of the world. He came face to foot with Kizaru, so this dude knows that he's not conquering too much, but has set his sights on terrorizing the weakest yet most manageable of all of the seas.
Shit, he ain't conquering nothing at all.
A lot better the first time you go through One Piece, because Arlong is the strongest guy we've seen in East Blue, who isn't Mihawk. We're gonna forget about him. And his crew completely obliterates every other pirate crew or squad of marines on this sea. So you think to yourself, mate, they could actually do this. Fishermen are strong enough to literally pick up buildings and throw them, which is a big upgrade from our previous villain building.
Hold on. It's not a whole building. It's a house.
Relationships. Don Krieg wanted to commandeer one, and Captain Kuro spent 3 years keeping one meticulously clean, but the Arlong pirates are the first villains to go F it and just toss an entire village. Each fisherman is capable of raw power beyond anything we'd seen to this point, other than Mihawk. If I ever make a statement like that in the future, just assume that I say other than Mihawk at the end. But Arlong is the leader of these guys. The dude ate a cannonball fired straight into his face. He is a serious threat, threat at this point in the story. He's the first villain that I wasn't 100% sure that Luffy could beat, and whilst he didn't give Luffy the challenge that, others would down the line,
Luffy literally knocked his teeth out, and them motherfuckers supposed to be strong as shit.
A very distinct step up and a preview of where One Piece was going. Arlong was also significantly smarter than any other East Blue villain, even Captain Kuro, and his whole thing was intelligence. But Arlong out-intelligented him. Not me, I couldn't even say the word properly. Arlong knew what he wanted, he knew how to get it, and scarily often, it didn't even require violence to achieve. Arlong implements select examples of violence, and mostly elects to manipulate people with words rather than actions, such as striking a deal with Captain Esme, which meant that he came with an enhanced sense of hopelessness, because not even the Marines, the police of this world, could help, which also symbolized a culmination of East Blue. To this point, we'd fought against both pirates and Marines, but this was the first case where we were up against both forces at once. But Arlong's true threat in this series can be summed up in one word, and that word is Nami. The reason why he works so well is because he is one of the only villains to be able to reach into us and hurt us at our core. The fact that he was able to make a Straw Hat's whole childhood a living hell is a badge of dickery that almost no other antagonist can claim. Even Judge isn't as bad because at least Sanji got to spend a good chunk of his childhood with Zeph.
I feel like if Nami's mom was a pirate and she had a crew, yeah, Arlong would not beat her. Nami's mom was cold.
Luffy, who insists that she's the navigator for his crew despite her betraying him, and Arlong, who insists that he's Nami's shipmate despite him betraying her. But one of my favorite things about Arlong is that over the course of this arc, we gradually strip away and break him down to reveal his true nature. As stated before, he starts out quite level-headed, logical, and even accommodating, such as when he let Zoro off with a warning for calling him a, quote, damn dirty half-fish, which, wow, Zoro, just wow. He also gets very defensive on Nami's behalf, even when she's being criticized by members of his crew, his fellow fish brothers. But it's like being seduced by the devil or a politician, I don't know, whichever's worse, because Arlong, yes, he seems perfectly reasonable at first, but all of the pleasantries are designed to hide a darkness beyond all imagination. And the first glimpse of his true self only really comes out when Usopp attacks him to save Genzo. After this, Arlong is enraged and he screams, "A puny, worthless human dared to attack me!" So Arlong, he puts on a good mask, but it doesn't take more than a slight breeze to blow that mask off, which makes him very volatile and very compelling. Every scene featuring Arlong is interesting because you never quite know what you're going to get. Is he going to be the calm and collected business fish? Is he going to be the compassionate crew captain? Is he going to be the sadistically cruel torturer? Or is he going to become the over-the-top violent racist? Arlong has a range of bad things, but that's a good thing. And just as a side note, I love that the first Straw Hat to stand up to Arlong in this arc is Usopp, of all people, the weakest person on the island attacking the strongest. And
Hold on, the weakest person, bro, it's gotta be between Usopp and Nami.
Proves Arlong's belief about how humans always lie, and also how pathetically weak they are compared to fishmen. But Arlong puts on a good facade, and even masquerades as wanting peace by banning weapons in Kokoyashi Village because, and I quote, weapons give birth to evil thoughts and violence. They're the #1 threat to peace. And honestly, Arlong's words here, they're not entirely unreasonable, because in some sort of ideal utopian world, no one would have a need for weapons.
Bruh, he literally got weapons on his body. He got a sword as a nose.
But this is a two-part statement. Arlong goes on to finish this thought in the next chapter when he states, possession of weapons is sedition. It's a threat to the peace of our dominion. So here Arlong has used his divine right to change the definition of the word peace to one that suits his personal preferences. And something else that I find strangely compelling about Arlong is that he's a villain who speaks through his eyes. He does his best to always maintain that joyous facade, but his true emotion is always in the eyes. Like when Luffy first invaded Arlong Park, there's this panel seared into my brain with Arlong smiling as if he's having some sort of great time, but his eyes are breaking down and cracking with uncontrollable rage. And eyes are a language that Arlong speaks fluently, as he's also able to read Zoro's eyes and states that these are not the eyes of a dying man, proceeding to show a very unusual degree of caution towards a human and deciding that he needed to kill Zoro right then and there, all because he read his eye language.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. That boy Arlong is devious. At one point, that motherfucker had cat eyes. and he a fish.
The thing that you'll notice about almost all of the best One Piece villains is that they smile a lot. And that is intentional on the part of Oda to challenge Luffy, the Joy Boy. A lot of the greatest clashes in One Piece match Luffy's real smile up against an antagonist's fake smile, and the fake ends up crumbling every time, with Arlong being no exception. Arlong's facade and dare I say hypocrisy doesn't end there though, because he went on to emulate the exact same thing that put him on this path to begin with. Fishmen are oppressed primarily due to the world nobles, and Arlong essentially became a mini world noble by adopting their beliefs in their divine right to rule, as well as adopting their taxation system of having all of the villagers under his control paying him a regular tribute, because as we all know, money is good. The one taboo he did not commit was slavery. At least not in the sense of physically chaining people up and like forcing them to do things. Although 4Kids Arlong did lock Belmare in a dungeon, and live action Arlong did physically chain up Nami to draw maps for him, neither decision
Wait. What?
is under his control paying him a regular tribute, because as we all know, money is good. The one taboo he did not commit was slavery. At least not in the sense of physically chaining people up and like forcing them to do things. Although 4Kids Arlong did lock Belmare in a dungeon, and live action Arlong did physically chain up Nami to draw maps for him, neither decision I'm a fan of, because it's a bit on the nose when it comes to the idea of slavery. This is another one of those selective Arlong beliefs, but the classical physical
sometimes I'll be confused
is a
too.
line that Arlong wouldn't cross. Not with the history of his race, and not after having been a prisoner himself. However, he did manage to achieve essentially the same thing without the chains. Nami has this illusion of freedom because she can come and go as she pleases, but she always has the metaphorical chain of the villagers pulling her back and the map room to act as her cell. So by classic Arlong logic, he's able to technically say that Nami's free while still enslaving her, and thus proving that he doesn't need to sink to the lows of humanity. I should say that amongst all of this terribleness, he does have one genuinely positive trait though, which is that he cares for his crew. And no East Blue villain to this point has used their crew as anything other than disposable pawns. But Arlong isn't just working for himself. He's working to ensure the prosperity of his crew, and he refers to each and every one of them as brothers, in much the same way that Whitebeard refers to his crew as his son.
That's the only W about Arlong. That is the only W about Arlong, bro. Anything else, bro, that motherfucker is crazy. A D1 manipulator.
Such as when he comes back to
D1
Arlong
scammer.
Park and discovers that Zoro defeated / killed, and it's not really clear, his crew, Arlong does the stereotypical drop to your knees and yell out at the sky at just how unjust the world is. Sort of like the Klingon death ritual, he screams out to warn the afterlife that a fishman is about to arrive and cause trouble, which is a very different reaction to when Usopp attacked him. There he couldn't believe that a filthy human would dare to attack his perfect fish himself. But here Arlong's anger is laced with sorrow and loss, which is something that to this day we still don't really see from the more intricately written villains that have arcs spanning whole sagas or even multiple sagas. It's a very rare show of vulnerability for One Piece antagonists as a whole. And it happens again when Zoro and Sanji defeat Hachan and Kurubi. Arlong enters this state where in the officially colored manga, it almost looks like he's activated Gear Second, but it shows that he takes his bond seriously, and much like Luffy, he is stronger when his comrades are being threatened. But obviously the most memorable Arlong moment is the betrayal of Nami, which is one of the most hard-hitting scenes in One Piece to this very day and always will be. And the worst part about it is just how clinically he did it. As we've explored, Arlong goes to great lengths not to lie, and here Arlong chose his words like a lawyer from the very beginning. He said that if Nami brought him 100 million berries, then he'd release the village. But that she did not do. She did not literally end up bringing him 100 million berries. Instead, Arlong got Captain Nezumi to confiscate it, which in a court of fictional pirate law,
dick, bro,
Arlong would
scammer,
win that case.
bro.
And
That's
one
what I'm
question
talking
I
about.
tend to ask when thinking about Arlong is what would have happened if Nami did bring him the money without being interrupted by Nezumi?
He still wouldn't have let her free, bro. He just want the money. That's it. He was still going to take control over that whole entire village.
Part of me would like to think that he would honor the deal, if for nothing else out of his desire to be above the deceptions of humanity. But a significantly larger part of me just knows that he probably would have found another semantic semantic loophole to get out of it. Because Arlong is a combination of cruelty and greed. Arlong takes great pleasure in causing pain to humans, and he seems to favor psychological.
That's what I'm saying, 100 mil.
With his economics in order.
He got everybody in the village in debt. First off, he taxing everybody just to live there 100,000. Like, bro, everybody in debt at that point. Ain't no way they coming up with that.
He knows that he can extract more value through this method, even though he could afford to let one village go. And after all of this manipulation, semantics, and pushing a beloved character to stab herself in the arm, what we needed more than ever was a good old-fashioned Luffy ass whooping. When we talk about...
okay, it's kind of making me mad that he's not showing these clips, because these clips is iconic.
Best punches in One Piece, that conversation is always dominated by St. Charles or Bellamy, or maybe even Kuma punching Saint Saturn very recently. But Luffy's
best punch is
on
definitely
Arlong
Bellamy.
was the OG satisfaction punch. And it's also satisfying to watch Luffy dismantle Arlong mentally in addition to physically. Because Luffy has something I like to refer to as the gift of being so dumb he's smart, which is best demonstrated when Arlong asks if he knows the difference between the two of them, and Luffy answers, "Our noses?" To Arlong, his species is everything. His most core beliefs stem from this almost religious faith in fishman superiority and a very clear distinction from humanity. And then you stack a guy like that up against Luffy, someone who is too dumb to even register that there's a difference in species. Luffy is the most pure example of a human we could have asked for, and from then on, every moment of Luffy versus Arlong is euphoric. In fact, my only complaint is that Luffy doesn't get to beat him up anywhere near as much as I would have liked. But that final attack is both perfect and iconic. And that's not the end of Arlong, because his development goes on to happen in reverse. We see what he became, and then later why he became that thing through the Fisher Tiger flashback. And all of a sudden, a lot of stuff started to make uncomfortable amounts of sense. Like the fact that Arlong Park was this poor imitation of the Sabati Park that he admired as a child. There's a lot of stuff that brings you dangerously close to empathizing with Arlong. But to be clear, this is nowhere near a fall from grace story. Arlong is still incredibly brutal in this flashback, and he does outright state that someone's got to crush the humans and break their pride. And at no point is he convinced that returning Koala to her village is going to do any good. He has no faith that a single village knowing about the good deeds of fishermen will have any impact, which we know through Luffy's journey is wrong. Luffy started small as well. He began with saving tiny villages, collecting allies, which snowballed into saving countries, acquiring a grand fleet, and these days a colossal chunk of the world supports him because of everything he's done, big and small.
Yeah, he ain't no real pirate. He's just a superhero. This motherfucker's not no pirate.
Same could have happened for human-fishman relations if things here had gone a bit differently. I don't think Arlong had to turn out this way. All he had to do was see one ray of genuine hope, but he didn't even get that. Instead, the Sun Pirates were ambushed, and Arlong's beliefs were set in stone. This is what humans do, he reaffirmed to himself. And again, with the context of this flashback, it is scarily possible to come close to empathizing with Arlong, because in this moment, he wasn't wrong. He knew that things would end badly. The only thing he couldn't predict was just how badly. And from his perspective, there was no hope for a future with peace between humans and fishmen. So to a large degree, Arlong is a product of the environment that the world government created, which doesn't even come close to absolving him of anything, because he did share that environment with Jinbei, who turned out to be a much more upstanding member of society. But I do really appreciate having this extended Arlong development regardless. And we do also have to recognize that
what the hell
in an
is Jinbei?
unfortunate way, we have Arlong to thank for the Nami we have today, because people are the sums of their experiences, both good and bad, and Arlong's tyranny managed to spawn a lot of good in Nami. Like the scene where she's at Belmer's grave and she decides that she's not going to cry anymore and to get stronger in her own way. She had to, because she didn't want to risk anyone else getting hurt for helping her, which applies to all aspects of Nami, including navigation, as she had to learn how to sail before she even hit double digits. Without Arlong, we may not have the skilled navigator we need today to get to Laugh Tale. I'm not saying he did the right thing, and I'm not saying that we should be on our knees thanking him, or thanking him in any way, even though I did say that we have him to thank, but it's to his credit as a villain that his actions shaped such a huge amount of one of our main characters. Of course, I would be remiss not to mention Belmer, who was also a major factor, but maybe we'll get into that when it's time to do the Dead Mothers tier list. However, for the sake of this list,
Bro, what the he doing a... Bro, why is he doing a tier list on dead mothers? That's crazy.
Arlong ticks all the boxes for a phenomenal villain, and he's what East Blue sorely needed to take this manga to the next level. But whilst he does tick all the boxes, I don't think he ticks them as boldly and with as much depth as later antagonists. Arlong was a fantastic step up, but if he was the true peak of One Piece, then this series wouldn't have lasted for a quarter of a century, so I can only grant him the status of A tier, which is the same...
Get the fuck out of here. Alright, yeah, I'm not watching the rest of see a video. First he said he gonna do a tier list on dead mothers. And then he put Arlong in A.